Hi everyone, welcome to our very first episode of our You Should See Me in a Crown series. Today I'm talking with the author Leah Johnson. If you've not purchased your copy of You Should See Me in a Crown yet, you can do that by following the link below in the description to purchase it from Kids Inc. We talk about that in this interview. And without any further ado, please enjoy this interview with Leah Johnson. Well, hi, Leah. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm so tired and panicking all the time about being in a pandemic and in the middle of a civil rights movement. But
Right.
other than that, feeling really hopeful.
Amazing. So we just first, this is the first interview of the month about your incredible book, You Should See Me in a Crown. So first, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your wonderful book?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to do this. So my name's Leah Johnson. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the author of the novel You Should See Me in a Crown. It's about a girl named Liz Leidy who is trying to get out of her small-minded Midwestern hometown and go to college, but those plans are derailed when her scholarship money falls through and she has to run for prom queen for the scholarship that's attached to the crown. That would be tough enough for a wallflower like Liz, but it's made even more difficult by the fact that Liz starts to fall for her competition.
Amazing. And one of the things that I'm doing every month is having the author pick an indie bookstore that they're wanting to support. So I'm pushing everyone this month to purchase their books with Kid Inc. So would you tell us a little bit about why that organization is so special to you?
Yeah, Kids Inc. is my hometown independent bookstore. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana originally, and we have an extraordinarily high rate of adult illiteracy in Indiana, actually. And so anytime I get the opportunity to pour back into putting books into the hands of the folks who need them in my hometown, I do my best to do it. So, Kids Inc. is the children's bookstore specifically. That is my hometown indie. But, we also have Indie Reads, which is downtown. We don't have many independent bookstores in Indianapolis. And so anytime I get the chance to encourage people to buy local, I push people to buy from Kids Inc. Because Shirley, you all don't know her, but you should know her because she's a local legend, a local icon. That's my girl. Like, Shirley really champions underrepresented writers and diverse stories. And she's an older white woman and she's from Nebraska. And she just is the most unlikely champion of these books. And yet she has dedicated her life to making sure kids who need books get them. And so I love Shirley, love Kids Inc.
I love it. So will you tell us a little bit about kind of the origins and your inspirations for writing this book?
Yeah, for sure. So, You Should See Me in a Crown is an attempt to write into the empty spaces that I saw in YA growing up. And so I wanted to queer the idea of the all-American girl. When we think about who is quintessentially all-American, the image that often pops into our heads is the straight, cis, thin, wealthy, even though wealth is not talked about, white prom queen, right? That is the pinnacle of American girlhood. And so I wanted to play with those ideas, and You Should See Me in a Crown. What does it mean when we take someone who is told that they are not enviable, when we take identities that are pushed further and further into the margins? What does it mean when we take those and make her the center of her own fairy tale? We rewrite the narrative of what it means to be worthy of a crown, right? And so Prom is, in my estimation, the perfect place to explore those ideas about race and gender and class and sexuality, especially when I got the chance to set it in my hometown, or a town like my hometown. It's not autobiographical at all, everybody.
And what are some of the big themes or messages that you're really hoping that young people will get from it?
What I want young people to walk away with is the fact that no matter who you are and how many times you have been told by the people around you or the media or, whoever is pumping the dominant narratives out into the world, whoever told you that you were not worthy of every good thing, I want you to know that you are worthy of those good things. And whether or not you feel seen or heard by the people around you right now, there is a world out there in which people are waiting for you. We're waiting for you, and we're ready to welcome you with open arms. Once you get to this side of things, it's pretty cool to be queer, I gotta say.
And can you speak maybe a little bit more to the importance of that representation? Especially, what I love so much about this is that it's such. I feel like in the queer YA space for so long, it was very much white gay men. Which, I mean, of course, as a white gay man, I devour that stuff, of course.
Right.
But like, what I love so much about this is that it's not just representation, but it's so much incredible intersectional representation.
Yeah, like I try to name in the book too, like the love interest in You Should See Me in a Crown, Mac, even references Kimberly Crenshaw, who invented and coined the term intersectionality, which is like actually much more complicated or complex than the idea of like, oh, I have a lot of different things going on. I check a lot of different boxes. What intersectionality is talking about is interlocking systems of oppression, right? And so like when we have a character like Liz's blackness is not separate from her queerness. Her queerness is not separate from her class identity. Her class identity is not separated from her womanhood. Like all these things come together for a confluence of like what is a really challenging existence in a town like Campbell County, where Liz is from. And so it was just crucial to me, if I was going to tell a story that was honest, that I had to lean into the ways that those intersections change the way we move through the world. I didn't see a lot of that when I was growing up. If I got one thing, I was not going to get the other. Like you're talking about like all the white gay male narratives. I love David Levithan. Like that is my guy. That is one of my literary heroes. And I was obsessed with his books when I was growing up. This is before I even identified as queer or had any idea that queerness was a thing that was possible for me. But I loved reading his work. And so in my adulthood, I'm like cross-identifying with these different pieces of this identity, right? Like I'm not white, but I'm queer. And so this is the only representation I'm being offered. And so I'm going to glom onto that. Or looking at Black TV shows that have like a token Black character. I'm not like Jodie from Daria in any real way, but I'm growing up and I'm clinging to Jodie from Daria because she's a Black girl who's existing in a hyper white space. I wanted a chance for all those things to be in one place, so you didn't have to, Black girls, queer Black girls, didn't have to worry about like, okay, I'm going to take this book, I'm going to pair it with this movie, and then I'm going to use this song, and then we're going to put it with this TV show. And then finally, like across 8 different mediums, you come up with something that feels true to you.
That's me. There I am.
Right. Yeah. Like just pointing to different places where it's like, okay, yeah, that's a little bit, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, we have that in common.
Close enough.
Yeah,
right.
Close enough. And I didn't want close enough,
Right.
and I want that to be the work that I do in all my books. I'm not interested in close enough anymore.
You mentioned at the beginning, we're in the middle of this, civil rights moment. And I think the book kind of speaks a lot to a lot of the present moment, the things that are happening in this present moment. Is there anything that you think, if you were writing this book right now, would maybe be different? Or do you think it would be, somewhat similar?
That's a really interesting question. I would probably write the book exactly the same. Mm-hmm. Which is like, maybe you should think differently about it. But I think for me, what was true when I wrote You Should See Me in a Crown is the same thing that's true now, right? Is this, how does the community that I'm from and the way that my body is received in that community, how does that change the way I move through the world? How does that change the way that I perceive safety or love or care? And like, I think at the end of the day, like these are all questions that are bound up in Black liberation. It's like, who can I rely on, and what does it mean to dismantle the systems that I've been taught are supposed to protect me, but I know don't? And I think that's what Liz is working to do in this book, is sort of upend all these ideas about who is worthy of care and compassion and who's not. My mom always says there's nothing new under the sun. And I think that is like very true of this moment as well. We have been fighting these same fights for decades, right? And I mean, I'm talking about the queer liberation front. I'm talking about the Black rights movement. I'm talking about all the intersecting identities that exist in this book. We've been fighting these same battles since my people was brought over here on boats, you know what I'm saying? And so like it changes its face every couple of years. It changes its face every couple of decades. But at the core of this, the conversations that we're having are the same conversations we've always had. I'm writing into a tradition of Black queer writers who have been talking about these things, like James Baldwin, whose words open up the book and the epigraph, right? Like, yeah, like James Baldwin was very vocally critical of America and the way that Blackness was treated violently or met with violence, the way that his queerness was met with violence, and the way that those two things not just intersected, but affected each other within those communities. Like, because he's Black in the queer community, like that changes the way white queer people receive him. Because he's queer in the Black community, that changes the way straight Black people receive him. And so like that's more than what you asked, but I always try to like spend some time paying homage to the people who like made space for me to be here, because I literally am just picking up where a lot of these writers left off.
Even, like you said, we have been having these conversations, and I think now we are getting to a place where more white people are finally listening, But like,
right,
it's like we have had these stories being told. We're now getting them kind of in a more told in a more forefront way, hopefully. At least I like.
Yeah, let's fingers crossed we get to ride the wave for a long time.
Right, exactly.
I think, looking around, when I started writing You Should See Me in a Crown, I talk about this all the time. When I started writing You Should See Me in a Crown, it's 2018, and CCBC releases the diversity numbers every couple of years for Kidlit, right? And in 2018, they had run the numbers for the 3 years prior. And across all 3 years, there were like 21 or 22 books in which a Black girl was the main character. And out of those books, in 3 years, there was one book that had a Black queer girl as the main character. Mm-hmm. That's the context that I was writing You Should See Me in a Crown into, right? And so to look around now and see my pals getting books published with queer girls of color, queer Black girls, yeah, you already know I'm ready to talk about Cinderella's Dead at 89.
I'll talk about Cinderella's Dead till I'm blue in the face. Like,
I love that book. And I'm such a huge fan of Kaylin, as a human being. And it's really exciting to me to be able to do this work alongside them. And I hope that this moment is not just a moment. I hope it's a movement, to borrow from Hamilton.
Love that. What were some of your inspirations for your writing, growing up or, and into adulthood?
I have been thinking a lot about this lately, about like the work that I most admired growing up and the ideas that I was internalizing in that work. And so when I was a teenager, like teen tween era, I don't know if you remember that, I'm sure you do. There was like this moment where every book was about rich white girls. It was like Gossip Girl, The A-List, Secrets of My Hollywood Life.
All had like the same cover.
All had the same cover. Most of them were coming from Poppy, which is like the same, they're all coming from the same imprint. And they were just like massively popular, and they were getting the click, they were getting adapted, they were on TV, they were, there was a movie there was all this stuff going on. And so I'm reading all these books about rich white girls and like their love stories and their drama and the way they move through the world. And that's what was super influential to me at the time, which explains why it took so long for me to come into any real understanding about my Blackness and queerness. And so I loved those books, and I still love returning to them. I'm not gonna lie, they're so much fun to read. I love reading about rich white people problems because they're so absurd to me.
Literally, because literally it's just absurd. It's just like absurdist. It's just insanity.
I'm like, I don't know what planet this is, but
where are the problems? Where's the drama?
Where's the real like the problems are all like,
where's the actual struggle? Yeah,
like, and I don't want to dismiss like the conflicts in the book, because I think the writers did what needed to be done with what they were doing. But I'm just like thinking about it now. Everything felt like of paramount importance when I was a teenager in these books. And I'm looking at it now, and I'm like, you mean to tell me the conflict is not whether or not your choice is either go to college and your parents lose their house because they have to pay for you to go to school, or not, or you like take a year off to work. Your conflicts are like, oh, he didn't want to talk to me, like, oh, the country club was like closed and so we couldn't go to the pool. and it's like just cannot relate at all, but
Right.
I do love the mess of it all. I think now, like in the past, like 5 or 6 years, the writers who have been super influential to me are like Nicola Yoon. I'm so fortunate that like I got to start writing YA at a time when like Nick Stone is blowing up, Angie Thomas is blowing up, you know, Elizabeth Acevedo is blowing up. Like it just, biggest names in YA were women of color, Black women in particular. And so, yeah, that's really exciting. I think, like I said, David Levithan is hugely inspirational to me, which is like really weird and full circle because now I get to work with him.
He's the one that actually connected us.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
he's my publisher, and
Yeah.
he's, you know, I have always been of the mind that you should like never meet your heroes because they often suck. And David is one of those people where it's like, I met him in real life and I was like, oh my God, you're as cool as I thought you were. You're as nice as I thought you were. Like, even though he's like a massive deal in my mind, he is like the godfather of YA.
Right.
He's still so normal. And I was like, why are you shouldn't even be speaking to me. Like you should make me talk to your assistant.
Right.
But it's not like that. He's so nice, which has been really great. So yeah.
So kind of shifting gears a little bit, a lot of the things I'm working to do is, you know, I'm talking with educators as well about getting these books in schools. And so I just want to know if you have any thoughts or any feelings or things you would say to educators or students that are really trying to push this kind of content, whether it be in curriculum or in their like school libraries that are maybe getting pushback.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I'll tell you, first of all, this is not answering exactly what you're asking, but something that I think about often because I am in the classroom because I'm a professor of creative writing. And so I'm thinking often about the conversations that I'm actually equipped to have. And so I think it's really dangerous to bring a text in front of a class thinking, oh, you know, like we should elevate the voice of marginalized writers, underrepresented writers, and then you bring it to the class and you don't have the tools to discuss it in a way that is productive or healthy, especially for the students in the class for whom that is more than a story, it is their life. And so I would say before you even bring a book to your classroom, make sure that you know without a shadow of a doubt you're ready to engage with it critically. 2, I think the canon is invented truly in classrooms and libraries. Like the books that we believe are classics because we are taught that they're classics. You know, like they're part of curriculum, they're part of like state standards, they're part of the AP test, right? And so teachers are on the front line of rewriting and renaming essentially what is and is not a canonical piece of literature. And so when you're being faced with pushback, I know that this is easier said than done, but just know that what you're doing is part of a larger fight for the future of literature. It's not just about the kids that are in your class now, it's about the way that they metabolize the text and the way that it's taught. And the fact that if you're holding up You Should See Me in a Crown on the same level as The Great Gatsby, you're teaching them alongside one another, they're in conversation with one another, right? Like, what does that tell your students about what is and is not text worthy of being discussed, worthy of being learned, worthy of being unpacked? And so it's not, I mean, this is what we do, you know what I mean? Like we fight the good fight in these rooms in which nobody wants to hear what we have to say. Those are the fights that change the world. If you don't have any opposition, then you're probably doing something wrong. I would also say this is a cheat code. If you don't know how to talk about a book, go to the publisher's website and see if they have a discussion guide for these books, because You Should See Me in a Crown is not Great Gatsby, which is like you can find 7 billion study guides or like questionnaires or whatever on the internet. But like Scholastic UK has come up with this really fantastic list of questions for discussions and writing prompts that you can give your students. And so I would encourage you, if you don't know quite how to lead a discussion, oftentimes the publisher has been in cahoots with the writer and on how to, you know, shape a conversation about their book. Right. They've already done the legwork. So just like lean into that.
Yeah. Another thing I get a lot, especially recently, I've been getting a lot of young people asking for recommendations for books that maybe are a little more discreet. I'm going to the kind of the cover. Because the cover of this, if you look at it, you wouldn't be able to tell this is a queer, which, you know, that's a huge conversation I've been seeing happening all the time, whether it should look queer or not. But I get a lot of questions from young people basically saying, what are books that I can read at home if I'm not out? Or what books can I read at school? And so was that something that kind of went into consideration when working on the cover?
I will say for me, thinking about the cover, whether or not the cover was queer, or indicated that the book was queer, it wasn't part of my thinking about the cover. What I and my team especially wanted to capture was this sort of ebullience of Black girl joy. Like, we wanted to make sure that people knew that this was a happy ending story for this Black girl. But when I thought about this in relation to this like conversation about, is this, does it indicate that the book is queer? Is it safe for kids to bring these books home, etc.? It did reframe for me the way I think about the power of cover illustration. I remember being a teenager and going to the public library with my family, and I didn't identify as queer then, but I remember trying to check out Pretty Little Liars, and I like brought it to the counter, and my mom like flipped through it, and she didn't like approve or disapprove of my books. I just, I read voraciously as a kid, so she didn't really think about it. But I come from a really strict, like, Pentecostal background. And so my mom, like, flips this book open on a whim and sees that one of the characters in the book is a lesbian. I think she's a lesbian. She dates women, I think exclusively over the course of the series. But either way, my mom, like, read the copy and she was like, put it back. You're not reading this. Yeah. And I hadn't even thought that it was something I wouldn't be able to read. So I think, like, even back then, like, I internalized, like, what was and wasn't acceptable based on, like, being told by someone that I couldn't take the book home. And so, this is a conversation I'm really interested in engaging with, but I also want people to know that the book is gay so that so that people can scream about it and champion it. And so kids know that in this book, there is a safe space for queer people. So I don't know. I think I'm wondering what it's an ongoing question.
I think it's an interesting, because I know growing up, I devoured, one of the first queer books I ever read in high school was the Rainbow Boys trilogy by Alex Sanchez.
Yes.
And like, those
Alex
are like,
Sanchez collection ad. Oh my gosh.
I mean, that he was like up there with David Levithan for me.
Yeah.
Being the OG.
Like an OG, yeah.
Right. And so like, I devoured that series, but that series is like explicitly like, I mean, you can't look at that cover and not be like, oh, that's gay.
Right.
So like
with a capital G.
With a capital G, lots of A's, like.
Right.
So I just think it's an interesting conversation. But I think having a book like this, that someone could possibly read, without outing themselves, is a really exciting thing.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, I'm really thinking about it. I mean, like, between me and you, like, the cover for Rise to the Sun, like, I just saw the comps the other day, and there are two people on the cover because the book is dual perspective. And this is something I'm really thinking about, is like, how queer can we make this cover? Which wasn't something I thought about before. I kind of was just like, yeah, of course these girls are gonna be together and it's gonna be like swoony and Black girl joy on the cover. But now I'm like, okay, maybe people are gonna have to get the audiobook. I don't know. It's like,
it's hard because because of the world we live in. It's so many of the people that the demographic it's for, it's just they're not in the best places to be having a book with that. So yeah, it's a hard conversation. But
yeah, well, and like I said, I teach, and so this next semester is going to be entirely online. And so part of what I have to do now is think about the way that I teach, because all of the texts that I work with in my class are by queer writers and writers of color. And so part of what I'm thinking about is like, okay, how do I frame this class with students who might not be out at home, whose parents might be walking through the back of the frame like, what's she talking about? Like, what's this professor saying?
Right.
Because I saw this conversation online, like, where somebody was accusing a professor of grooming their students. Like, there's a queer studies class that was taught online for the second, spring semester. Right. And they were like, oh, this is where grooming begins. Like, see what they're doing to our kids. And it's like, what kind of, like, this isn't something that straight people ever have to navigate. You don't ever have to think about whether or not your class is socially acceptable to kids and their parents,
Well, the first line in this book is obvious, a huge shout out to Beyonce, which just had me hooked from the beginning. And Beyonce gets a couple shout outs throughout the book. Was there any other like pop culture moments or influences that you had while writing this?
Yeah, well, like somebody before the book came out, I was still like checking Goodreads all the time. I was like, oh my God, I gotta see what people are saying about the book, which I have not done since, way before the book came out now. But like one of the earliest reviews was like, oh, it's so distracting, like all the pop culture references, like it's trying so hard to be hip. And, I think obviously like everyone is entitled to their opinion about a book, but I think for me, when I think about contemporary YA, what I want is a book that is a relic of its time. Like I want a book to speak really clearly and directly about the present moment. And so when I'm writing, I'm not worried about whether or not we're going to outgrow the references that are in the book. Of course we're going to outgrow the references that are in the book. And
we'll never outgrow Beyonce references.
And that's the thing. Beyonce is actually timeless. And so she's a really safe bet. And like I reference the Kardashians in the first chapter. The Kardashians have been a staple of pop culture for a decade, right? And so for me, that was also a safe bet. Is like whether or not the Kardashians are like as public or as famous in 5-10 years, it's not particularly relevant to me, because they are going to go down in history as somebody who was a staple of this moment. And so because I write contempt, I think like my standards for what is timely is, or like what should stay in a book without like aging the book. I don't necessarily believe in that. I was reading a Sarah Dessen novel the other day, and there was like one of my favorites of hers, which is This Lullaby. And there's a landline in the book. And I was like, and like not just a landline, but a phone with a cord. Like she was like carrying a corded phone through the house. And it was like a major part of the scene. And I was like, what? Like, this is so of that moment. But it should be, I think that's the job of books, is to reflect the times. And so anyway, yeah, I think about that when I put pop culture references into the book. And I mean, You Should See Me in a Crown is heavily influenced by like other mediums of like popular culture. So like it is very much a play on like old John Hughes movies, and very much a play on like She's All That, for instance, or A Cinderella Story, like all these movies that came out, like this is in conversation with those, and like they're all of their time. And so we're just like, we're building on those conversations. I think Beyonce will be in all my books.
I would hope Beyonce should be in every book, really. I think it's interesting though, that first review you mentioned reading, if those books we talked about before, like the Click, all those were nothing if not full of just really, really dated cult. I mean, that's all those were. So I just think it's interesting that is what someone was going to pinpoint.
Right. Right. Or like even, somebody, I can't remember what writer it was talking about like why they don't put social media in their book. And they're like, oh, because social media evolves so rapidly and da. Okay, sure. But if I'm writing contemporary, there's no way I can write a book about teenagers existing right now unless they exist somewhere where there is no technology. Like wherein that's like not a part of the way they communicate with each other or like interact with the world at large. And so sure, there's not going to be TikTok in a decade. Like TikTok will be gone. It'll be a relic, and there'll be something that comes up and replaces it. R.I.P. Vine. You know what I mean? Like, but if we're going to tell honest stories about teenagers right now, then we got to talk about how teenagers exist right now.
But what I love that what you did though is you kind of created this version of social media that doesn't exist in the real world. It felt like a little bit of a throwback to Creek Secrets. And like Simon, I was like, oh, it's like people are like posting all the drama. I love it. Feels like a type of social media that, because it doesn't quite exist for us, it could go on longer.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too. Like Creek Secrets is on Tumblr, and like Tumblr in the past couple of years has like imploded because of capitalism. And so even that is like, okay, how can we make something that lasts? I mean, like, we can't. And so, the way I try to subvert that in this book, and also between me and you, I keep saying that like this is like just having a kiki. It's, Confidential makes an appearance in my next book as well. Like it's a major part of the plot in that book too. And that's just because like, I don't know whether or not Twitter is gonna become a paid subscription service, and so nobody's gonna use it, or I don't know whether or not TikTok is gonna be bought out by AOL or something, and then like nobody's gonna use TikTok. But like, if I make my own alternative to that, then I can do whatever I want with it.
So does that mean we're getting a Liz Lighty-verse?
You know what? If I have anything to say about it, which apparently I do since I am writing the books, yes, all of the books are interconnected. And so there's like, I'm revising Rise to the Sun right now, so who knows what's gonna like make it into the final version. But there are some familiar faces that like make it into the next book. And so I'm excited. I'm trying to be like Becky. I'm trying to get like Becky. You know, she's got the game on lock and I love it. There are these writers who have this like continuity between books that I have always loved. Sarah Dessen does this too, where like there's a band, Spinnerbait, that appears in all of Sarah Dessen's books, and they don't even necessarily all take place in the same town, but there's like a social media, You Me is what it's called, that everybody uses. There's like, you know, just like characters that appear in the backgrounds of all these books that kind of pull them together. And so I've always loved that. And I thought if I ever got a chance to write more than one book, I wanted to find a way to connect them with each other. So,
but I will say, it was like frustrating for 2 seconds because I'm a reader that whenever there's music talked about or like a band in a book, yeah. I'm like, because like Julian Winters had a band in, I think it was Remy Cameron.
Yeah.
I was like, great. So I spent the entirety of while I was reading that book listening to that band. So I went and searched for it because I was like, oh, maybe it's an indie group. Nope.
Right.
Didn't exist. I was like,
I just made them up. Yeah.
So I listened to Beyonce the entire time and it was fine.
Right, that's a good alternative. You know, like somebody asked me the other day, like, okay, so because they're not real, who should I be listening to that sounds like them? And I was like, imagine imagine Only by the Night Kings of Leon meets Paramore with the orchestrations of Arcade Fire.
Incredible.
It's like, okay, Pitchfork is giving that album -7, but that's fine because in my mind they're going to be the biggest band in the world. So
I'm obsessed with it. I'm great.
You know what? Have you read Daisy Jones and the Six?
I've not.
Okay, so let me tell you, I felt the same exact way when I read Daisy Jones and the Six. It's about a fictional band called Daisy Jones and the Six, and it was so real to me. I was so drawn into the world of this band and like their origin story that I truly searched for the Six. And I was like, okay, maybe I can get some merch, maybe I can get a band tee, like maybe they're going on tour. And I was like, Leah, this is fiction, but it reads like nonfiction.
Sophie Gonzalez and Cale Dietrich just announced their
yes.
And I was like, oh, great. And there's a lot of stuff happening with that too.
I was like, yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms. And honestly, you know what? Shout out to my girl, Sophie, because the amount of pushback that Sophie gets for her books, sometimes I do not understand. I mean, like misogyny, sexism, homophobia, et cetera, et cetera. But like, there's just something really specific about the targeted harassment at my girl. And I just want to say, Sophie, I'm with you. I'm buying all your books. As far as I'm concerned, we stand.
Oh, I go hard for Sophie Gonzalez.
Right.
I will continue to go hard for, yeah.
Yeah. I had to take a quick detour. I know that we weren't talking about that, but I was like,
I'm always fine with the Sophie Gonzalez detour. Like that is a detour I'm always happy to make.
Yeah.
So just kind of for fun, I want to know what you think Liz and the crew are kind of doing during quarantine.
Oh, yes, child. Okay, so Liz lives with her grandparents and her immunocompromised little brother. And so I think Liz is livid. She has been angry for 6 months straight, like just on Confidential, like yelling at anybody who will listen, like stay inside, put your freaking masks on. So I think that's how Liz is spending a lot of her time, doing some arrangements, like making some music, probably doing a lot of group FaceTime calls with Gabby, Stone, and Britt. And I think Jordan he's relieved that he doesn't have to go to practice every day.
Yep.
So Jordan's playing a lot of 2K with Robbie from their respective houses. I think Stone has probably been in a deep meditative state for the past 4 months. So, she's in the astral plane. We can't really connect with her right now. And Britt is listening to Folklore and pretending like she's not.
They released that list of all of the YA books that are songs from Folklore. And I saw I was like, oh, great. So now I have to listen to this album. I mean, I work in, like, before the pandemic, worked in theater, so I'm such like a musical theater. I was like feeling all the prom vibes because a lesbian from Indiana as well. I was like, I love.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was like, I guess I have to listen to this Taylor Swift album now. But
I will say, well, two things. First of all, I have such a deep affinity for the Prom. Even it's not my favorite musical ever, but it is like it means so much to me because like I saw the Prom with my mom the night that I came out. And so it was like we went to see this show together. She flew to New York specifically because my book had gotten announced the day before. And she was like, you shouldn't be celebrating by yourself. I'm booking a ticket right now. And so she flew to New York and to celebrate with me. And we went and saw the Prom that night, and we like sat like in the third row or something. And my mom was just having the time of her life. And I was like crying the entire second act because like my mom was so happy and she loved the story so much. And I was like, I'm lying to her. I felt like I was being so dishonest with her, which I don't believe is true of people who are not out to people in their lives. But that is how I had like internalized that shame. And so I like saw the show, and it's the thing that gave me the final push to come out to my mom. And so shout out to the Prom, shout out to Indiana queers, Indiana Sapphics. We out here.
Well, next week I'm chatting with the actress who played Alyssa Green.
My God.
She read it, so we're chatting about it.
She read what?
She read your book.
No, she didn't.
Yeah, because I have a friend who was in the Prom with her. She's currently reading it. We're chatting about it later. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Whoa. I'm like really tripping out. Like, please thank her for me. Like, let her know, like, without the Prom, who knows where I'd be right now.
That's such an exciting, that's such a lovely story. I love that.
I really love that show. I feel like it got paid dust, definitely deserved more Tonys than it received, but that was a tough year too. So it's like, what do? You know what I mean? Like the competition be so fierce some years that it's like a show can be truly excellent. And
well, I think I was mostly upset because not only the Prom, but two really, really lovely queer shows got shut out. Because also Head Over Heels, which is my favorites. That's derailing of
right. I was like, we can have it. Bring me back. We'll talk musical theater, because that is like, this is my like. People don't know this about me. Maybe they do. You could probably figure it out by the fact that I did show choir in high school, but I freaking love musical theater. I don't know if I can curse on this, so I'm like
go for it.
Bleeping myself out. So yeah, that's my favorite thing to talk about next to books.
I just want to know, what are the books that you're recommending to people right now?
Yeah, so I am not reading as much as I would any other year. One, because we're in a pandemic. Two, because I've been working on Rise of the Sun all year with very few breaks in between. But the books that I've read have almost all been by friends of mine. And so I recommend Cinderella is Dead by Caitlin Bayron, The Henna Wars by Adiba Jaigirdar, Late to the Party by Kelly Quinlan. I'm like, let me look at my shelf. I would also recommend Now That I Found You. So this is by Christina Forrest. It's coming out next month, so you all don't have access to it yet. But when it does come out, I think you should read it. It's straight, but it's still great. What can you do?
We'll forget.
Right. And I would recommend Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. I think the first chapter alone, regardless of how you feel about the rest of the book, I know somebody was like, I was confused. I didn't know what was going on. Regardless of whether or not it's confusing to you, that first chapter is masterful. I bought it on, like, Jessica Goodman, I think, posted it on her Instagram story. If I'm messing this up, sorry to whoever actually posted it, but just posted the first page, and I read it and I instantly bought it because I was like, this is gorgeous prose. Akwaeke is, what can I say, truly an artist, like a sculptor of beautiful prose. So anyway, those are my recs.
And so, I mean, you mentioned Rise of the Sun. Is there anything you'd like to say about that? Is there anything else you'd like just what's next?
Oh my goodness. You know how publishing works. So I'm like holding on to 1,000,000,001 secrets right now, but I will say there's something really exciting that I get to announce very soon about You Should See Me in a Crown. And so I'm really looking forward to that. I get to write more books, and so so we can look forward to that. What those books are and when they're coming, I don't know. Maybe she's just wishful thinking. But yeah, so next year we know for sure I have a book coming out called Rise to the Sun. It's about two girls named Tony and Olivia who go to a music festival in search of one last epic weekend before they embark on the rest of their lives. And they find each other while they're there, and they need each other to accomplish some things over the course of the weekend. And because it's a Leah Johnson novel, maybe they fall in love by the end.
I really hope they do.
Same.
Great. So last thing, if you could sum up what you hope You Should See Me in a Crown makes people feel in one word or like a sound, just a word or a sound, what would that be?
Joy.
Thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure, an absolute joy.
Great. I love that. Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Next week, I'm sitting down with Isabel McCalla from the Prom musical on Broadway to talk about You Should See Me in a Crown and the prom and representation in all different forms of media. So tune in then, and until then, I'll talk to you later.